Good afternoon, everyone. Can I remind members that social distancing measures are in place across the Chamber and the Holyrood campus. Please take care to observe these measures over the course of this afternoon's business. And the next item of business is portfolio questions, and it's on education. Can I warn everyone, I'm going to be quite strict on timings for questions and answers because there are too many members over the last couple of days who have missed out on the chance to ask questions. So I'll go, please. Question number 1 is Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it will ensure that children and young people and their families are actively involved in decisions regarding additional support for learning that directly affect them.
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, on the 21st of October, the Scottish Government and the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities published a joint action plan accepting the recommendations of Angela Morgan's independent review of additional support for learning. At its heart is a commitment at national, local authority and school level to actively involve and listen to children, young people and their families in decisions that affect them. We will seek to remove any remaining barriers and consider support that can be put in place to encourage participation. Progress will be monitored by the Additional Support for Learning Implementation Group and reported by October 2021.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Children in Scotland's inclusion ambassadors contributed to the review, and one of the things that they asked was if the recommendations from the review would affect their own experience of school, bearing in mind the pandemic, but also that our children and young people are in school. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary when the young people who contributed will see change, please?
John Swinney.
The issues that Ruth Maguire raises are central to how our entire education system has to operate in listening to the pupil voice or the young person's voice. And the contribution of the Children's Scotland Young Ambassadors for Inclusion has been very effective in making that point at the heart of Angela Morgan's review. And I'm certainly committed to, and I know that educators of length and breadth of the country are committed to making sure that they listen carefully to the voice of children and young people. I would expect those changes to be felt in the course of this school year, but obviously the review in October 2021 provides us with the opportunity to take stock on the progress that has been made.
Supplementary from Jamie Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Morgan Review said, I quote, "Additional support for learning is not visible or equally valued within Scotland's education system. Not all young people who need support are being supported to flourish and fulfil their potential." Deputy First Minister, can you confirm by what date you think the Government will have implemented its careful recommendations in full?
John Swinney.
Well, this is an ongoing priority, but what I've committed to is that report back in 12 months' time when we see the achievements that have been made. Fundamental to the point that Mr Green raises is an important point, which is we have to make sure the needs of every young person are met within our education system. And that means that different support will be in place or should be in place for individual young people. And that point has been reinforced by Angela Morgan's review and the fact that we have taken forward a joint agreement with COSLA about the implementation, because this will be done within schools where local authorities are running those schools, is a crucial commitment to make sure this review is effective in changing practice.
Question number 2. Bob Doris. I hope. No. I think, oh, there he is. He appeared just in time. Bob Doris, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what financial support has been made available to further and higher education students during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Richard Lochhead.
Eligible students in further and higher education have continued to access bursary, grant and loan payments throughout the pandemic. In addition to that, the Scottish Government provided emergency funding earlier this year of £5 million to support students impacted by COVID-19. We also provided early access to £11.4 million of higher education discretionary funds to support students over the summer period and into this academic year. £2 million was also brought forward for further education students at college by the Scottish Funding Council. And I would say if students are continuing to face additional hardship as a result of COVID-19, they should apply for discretionary fund support from their college or university. And finally, we did announce a digital inclusion fund of £5 million to support access to digital equipment and tackle digital poverty.
Bob Doris.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. I've had students contact me who have been forced into significant hardship due to delays in getting their SAS funding. The students were forced to apply for student hardship funds, with some applications rejected by institutions as they didn't have SAS award letters. Can I ask 3 specific brief points to the Minister? What progress has been made in tackling this backlog? Can SAS seek to prioritise students who may be in the most precarious financial situations? What guidance can he give universities and colleges to try and ensure those who are most in need are not rejected simply because they don't have a SAS award letter?
Richard Lockhead.
It's important that any student who requires support at this time receives it from their university or college in terms of the hardship funds. I'd like to thank Bob Doris for bringing that issue to my attention in terms of some institutions he is saying are not providing support where the SAS award letter can't be produced by the student. If that is the case, I'll certainly investigate that because we have to make sure that's addressed, that particular issue. Due to the uncertainty with the pandemic throughout the past year or so, there was not as many early applications to SAS, therefore they built up a bit of a backlog because many of the applications came in a bit later than usual. However, at the moment they have now determined and processed 97% of undergraduate applications that have been received, and SAS are also working with the Student Loans Company to make sure that everything's been coordinated to make sure the students get the help they deserve. But I thank the member for bringing that point to my attention and I'll investigate that.
Supplementary from Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. NUS have today asked that additional support be promised for students who cannot or choose not to leave their term time address over Christmas. Will the Minister ensure that's the case?
Richard Lockhead.
Thank you, Ian Gray, for that question as well. And he'll be aware the Scottish Government is working hard with all our stakeholders to ensure we can have the safe return of students over Christmas where they choose to do so, if indeed that's possible in terms of the pandemic. And it is indeed, however, the case that many students, more than usual, I expect, will wish to stay in their term time accommodation over Christmas, particularly international students, and therefore we are in discussions with our universities and colleges, mainly in this context, our universities, to ensure that adequate support is available for them. First and foremost, that's the responsibility of the universities, but of course we're discussing that matter with them.
Question number 3, Lewis MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what initiatives have been brought forward by industry bodies in support of offshore energy training and skills.
Jamie Hepburn.
I welcome energy products which will provide flexibility for oil and gas and offshore wind workers to pursue opportunities across both sectors. I also welcome the ECITB Train to Retain scheme supporting essential skills and providing long-term opportunities for sustainable employment, including retention of skills to support a net zero energy transition, and the creation of the Energy Skills Alliance, who are creating an integrated all-energy career proposition for a net zero energy industry. It's crucial that a sustainable and resilient future is developed for those who work in the energy sector and supply chain, whose skills and expertise will be vital for the transition for a zero-carbon future.
The connectivity seems quite bad. Are you able to ask your supplementary, Mr MacDonald? Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you very much. I hope the Minister would agree with me that the key here for the worker is that if the worker has the skills and qualifications, he or she is able to move freely between the oil and gas and offshore renewable sectors in both directions as employment opportunities arise. Will the Minister undertake to work to ensure that employers in all the offshore energy sectors support that principle of mutual recognition of relevant skills and qualifications?
Jamie Hepburn.
That is a principle that I broadly agree with, and I can say to Ms MacDonald, the Oil and Gas and Energy Transition Strategic Leadership Group, which is chaired by Paul Wheelhouse, it was refocused in April and is meeting monthly to identify practical actions to support the sector and its workforce, and that will be one such issue it can explore.
Question number 4, Dean Lockhart. Your microphone doesn't appear to be on. Is your card in?
It is now, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Dean Lockhart.
Thank you very much. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to recognise school grade appeals made by young people in exceptional circumstances.
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government fully recognises that young people are rights holders and key stakeholders within the education system. In line with the Priestley Review recommendations, we have asked the SQA to review the appeal system for national qualifications in a fair and transparent way. The SQA will conduct this review working closely with key stakeholders, including learners and their representative groups, to ensure it best meets young people's needs.
Dean Lockhart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. I've been corresponding with a constituent whose son was unable to attend full-time schooling for over a year due to a disability. My constituent's son received independent tuition and self-studied throughout this period. However, when it came to the submission of estimated grades to the SQA, his school submitted those estimated grades without consultation with the independent tutors who were best placed to assess his progress. My constituent and the tutors disagreed with the estimated grades submitted by the school, but they have been unable to appeal those directly to the SQA because only schools can do so. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, does he recognise that there are exceptional circumstances in which the existing SQA appeal system doesn't work? And what advice can he give to my constituent and others who find themselves in similar exceptional circumstances?
John Swinney.
There is provision within the existing arrangements for exceptional circumstances to be considered, and obviously Mr Lockhart raises fairly with me a set of circumstances that on the face of it appear to be in those circumstances. I'm very happy to consider the case that Mr Lockhart has raised with me, if he would care to write with me to me with the details, and I will correspond with the SQA on that particular point. I think it is important that we have an appeal system that does recognise the fact that there can be specific circumstances that will impede the ability of a young person to have their performance properly recognised in an examination circumstance, and that should be available to young people in those circumstances. As I say, the Priestly Review recommended that we look at this again, which we will do, but I'm very happy on that specific case to consider the points that Mr Lockhart has raised with me.
A quick supplementary, please, from Daniel Johnson.
The Cabinet Secretary referenced the review into exam appeals. I was wondering if you could confirm when that review will report and whether it will address directly the point that appeals and the decision to appeal should be in the candidates' decisions ultimately rather than the schools.
John Swinney.
I think there's a pretty fundamental point in the heart of Mr Johnson's question, which is where the initiation of an appeal should lie. Should that lie with the candidate or should that lie with the with individual schools? Up until now, we have always followed the approach that that should rest with schools. I recognise that there is a changing dynamic about this issue because of the commitments that we have made in relation, for example, to the incorporation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law, which will, in a sense, change some of these fundamental assumptions. So the point that Mr Johnson has raised is a legitimate point. I can't give him a definitive answer today, but it is a point that will be explored in the review.
Question number 5, Liam Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to protect teachers in the North East from COVID-19.
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the safety, health and well-being of teachers and other staff is of paramount importance, and any teacher who has symptoms of COVID-19 should book a test through the National Health Service Inform portal. In addition, if a teacher or other essential staff member within a school setting does not have symptoms but is worried about their circumstances, they are able to book a test through their employer. Our guidance for schools, developed with the Education Recovery Group, sets out clearly the mitigations that should be in place to ensure schools are safe, open and welcoming. Furthermore, Scotland's strategic framework, published last week, sets out our latest position on community-wide protective measures which are designed to ensure and enhance the safety of our schools.
Liam Kerr.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Press and Journal reported last week that Aberdeenshire schools are recording 240 coronavirus-related absences each week. Now, to protect teachers, Aberdeenshire Council implemented mitigations including enhanced cleaning routines. But it's warned that the resources needed are stretched, especially in rural areas, and it's having to take urgent remedial action. So the Council needs help and resource urgently to continue to keep teachers and our kids safe. So will the Scottish Government provide it?
John Swinney.
So Mr Kerr will probably be familiar with the financial arrangements that we have put in place with local government in respect of expenditure of this type. We have distributed already £20 million of new resources entirely for the type of activities, cleaning activities, other costs that arise out of the COVID requirements for schools to all local authorities. We've indicated that there will be a further exercise in examining the costs of individual local authorities where the Government has committed that we may put on the table a further £30 million based on the actual costs incurred by local authorities. Now, that data collection exercise will be considered during the month of November, based on the experience since the return of schools in August, and I'm sure Aberdeenshire Council will have access to some resources. I'd be surprised if they did not.
Two short supplementaries, please. Richard Lyle, then Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, President Officer. Cabinet Secretary, what extra safety measures and support are considered for schools in areas like Lanarkshire, which will enter Tier 3, to help protect staff and pupils?
John Swinney.
President Officer, the Recovery Group's guidance is very clear that there are a range of measures that should be undertaken within individual schools routinely to ensure that they are safe within the COVID environment. And obviously, in all circumstances, they should be applied to ensure our schools are safe, regardless of the level at which a local authority is placed. Obviously, when we consider schools in North and South North Lanarkshire in connection with Mr Lyle's constituency, they are going to be in level 3. The guidance is very clear about the steps that need to be taken to support education in that context. We do hope that we avoid a situation where North Lanarkshire has to move into level 4, and I've appreciated my dialogue with the local authority in the last few days about the steps that they have committed to take to ensure that that is the case. There will be further Education Recovery Group guidance published tomorrow, which will set out further measures to ensure that our schools remain safe for all staff and pupils, which is our essential commitment.
Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There have been reports of some local authorities forcing vulnerable staff to come to work, even when they don't feel safe. The Education Secretary will be aware of my proposal to import the Danish model for keeping vulnerable teachers safe by making doctors' advice on working arrangements mandatory. Will the Scottish Government take this forward?
John Swinney.
I think in terms of the duty of care of any employer would extend to considering the appropriateness of whether a member of staff should be required to be at school. And again, the guidance from the Education Recovery Group sets out these provisions and enables individual teachers to make representations to their local authority about their own circumstances, and I think that should be done in all cases. And obviously the Education Recovery Group monitors some of the patterns on these questions. In addition to that, the answer that I gave originally to Mr Kerr in his question indicated that there is testing opportunities available for staff should they wish to, even if they do not have symptoms, and I would encourage them to take up those opportunities if they think it would be appropriate.
Question number 6, Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when Skills Development Scotland will reopen its training provider register.
Jamie Hepburn.
In Scotland, we don't hold a training provider register. However, Skills Development Scotland contract annually for modern and foundation apprenticeships. The Employability Fund take through the year. Bids from training providers can be submitted through the Public Contract Scotland website. SDS are currently inviting bids from training providers for modern apprenticeship starts. This procurement was opened on the 15th of October and will close on the 16th of October 2020. Its successful contracts will then be issued to training providers in time to deliver places in 2021-2022.
Again, that was very difficult. Did you get that, Mr Burnett?
I'm afraid not, but I'll ask my supplementary and perhaps the Minister can reply in writing. I thank the Minister for that answer, what we did hear of it, and note my register of interest. Now, Professional Drone Training Limited in my constituency is a recognised assessment entity authorised by the Civil Aviation Authority, but not by Skills Development Scotland, and was told there were no plans to reopen the register. SDS instead was sending people to be trained in Devon, leading to further expenses of travel and accommodation, simultaneously failing to support Scottish jobs. So what confidence can we have in the Minister is focused on jobs when fast-growing sectors are treated like this? And what can the Minister do to fast-track training providers who possess UK-wide accreditation already?
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, I'm sorry if people can't hear my answer, because what I did say in the initial answer is that contrary to any training provider being told that the register is closed, we don't have a training provider register. There's a process of putting in place contracts. If Mr Burnett wants to write to me with those specific details, I'll be happy to explore the issue with SDS. If there is demand for specific training, my expectation is that SDS explore that and look at it seriously. So if he gives me information, I'll be happy to look into it further.
Thank you. Can I suggest a good read at the official report tomorrow, Mr Burnett? Question number 7, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer members to my register of interests to ask the Scottish Government, in light of show people being added to the 2022 census, what action will it take to ensure that their children will be added to the CMIS education records in schools?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, following the introduction of Showman, Showwoman as an option for Scotland's Census 2022, we will consult with local authorities and other partners on the introduction of Showman, Showwoman as a specified category for the People's Census.
Richard Lyle.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In a meeting that Christine Stirling, Education Officer for Showman's Guild Scotland, and I had with you, Cabinet Secretary, you agreed to raise this matter with local councils, and I know you did. Glasgow City Council, however, seems not to be taking this on board. Can I ask you that you raise this again with them and send out further guidance to all councils in Scotland to address the views of the Scottish section of Showman's Guild Scotland?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I recognise the long-standing interest that Mr Lyle has taken in these issues, and also I recall the meeting that we had with Christine Stirling. I reiterate my commitment to encourage this approach to be taken, and I will look into the issues that Mr Lyle has raised with me today and take further action if necessary.
Question number 8, Neil Findlay.
To ask the Scottish Government for what reason the education attainment gap is reportedly continuing to grow.
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, tackling the poverty-related attainment gap is the critical priority of this Government, and that is why we've committed over £750 million to the Attainment Scotland Fund and are continuing this Scottish Attainment Challenge into 2021-22. We are making progress on closing the attainment gap. The Attainment Scotland Fund Year 4 evaluation reported that the attainment gap narrowed on a number of indicators, and 91% of head teachers reported improvements in closing the attainment gap as a result of Scottish Attainment Challenge supported approaches.
Neil Findlay.
The schools exam fiasco showed the entrenched nature of education inequality and signed off a system that had discrimination by social class at its core, bearing for all to see the educational attainment gap. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, where is the big substantial intervention to end the scandal of educational inequality in Scotland?
John Swinney.
Well, I would contend, Presiding Officer, that that is the Scottish Attainment Challenge, which is a £750 million commitment, which has now been taken forward in every locality in the country to tackle the poverty-related attainment gap. And I would encourage Mr Findlay to take heart and encouragement from the fact that our education system sees this as an absolutely central priority and a focus of their activity. Mr Findlay and I am also certain will be able to agree that the issues that drive the poverty-related attainment gap are not just about issues within our schools. They are about wider issues which are influenced by some of the damaging decisions that are taken in relation to welfare, employment, and we are currently experiencing and wrestling with some of these challenges as a consequence of COVID and the economic disruption that is taking place. So our schools will do a phenomenal amount of activity to try to close the gap, but we also have to recognise there are wider policy choices made by the United Kingdom Government that are changing the landscape of our country in relation to poverty, and we have to tackle that as well.
A short supplementary, please, from Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what the Scottish Government's response is to the 2019 Head Teachers Survey, where 9 out of 10 head teachers said that the Attainment Scotland Fund is making an impact in closing the poverty-related attainment gap, and that 98% of teachers expect to see improvement in closing the gap over the next 5 years?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, one of the points that I made in my answer to Neil Findlay is relevant in responding to Rona Mackay's question, and that is the commitment of educators, the length and breadth of the country, to tackle the poverty-related attainment gap. It is a central educational priority of the Scottish Government and also of educators the length and breadth of the country, and I'm confident that the evidence demonstrated by the response in the Head Teacher Survey gives us a strong foundation on which we can take the necessary action to close the attainment gap in the forthcoming period.
That concludes the portfolio questions in education and skills, and we'll move on to the next item of business.